Hi, it's Paul. Let's look at SCC in respiratory specimens. So this is the second most common malignancy seen. This is a typical presentation of a well-differentiated keratinizing SCC in sputum. Sputum is quite a good test for this because it's quite a central tumour, and this, as you can see, has lots and lots of these orangiophilic, cordate, weird-looking, bizarre squamous cells, many of them having quite degenerate, but if you look at, say, this one here, quite angular nuclei with that dense opaque chromatin. And I'm just going to cruise around and show you some of the weird shapes that you see in amongst these if you look carefully. Little cordate cell with a tail on it, another one up there with quite dark nuclei. A lot of necrotic material in the background here. That's what all this granular material is. And you can see there are just bizarre little cells everywhere that on low power look pretty innocuous, but real tadpoles and almost fibrous cells there. It's always reassuring to see cells like this that are obviously squamous, but have more open chromatin. And by that I mean you can see the granules of chromatin rather than that dark sort of pycnotic appearance that a lot of those orangiophilic cells have. And so looking around here, I can see some really high NC ratio cells with very dark, fairly large nuclei, as well as little orange cells. And these ones have got obvious squamous cytoplasm, I think, and central nuclei. These ones have angular, dark, very hyperchromatic nuclei. And here you can see some really high NC ratio cells that have irregularly distributed malignant chromatin patterns, and quite well-defined cell borders, obvious squamous cytoplasm. In brushes and washes, similar appearance often. So this is one here. You can see the quite elongate looking cell there. There's a lot of neutrophils and debris in this case as well. But there's also groups of cells that have more obvious malignant criteria. So high NC ratio, enlarged, variable and hyperchromatic nuclei. These ones seem to be better preserved, and you can see the irregular chromatin and nucleoli present in this case. And another group over here, much larger group, and so that is like a big crowded hyperchromatic group of malignant SCC cells. This is another case, and it's one that is not as keratinized. Some benign bronchial cells there, and then these big malignant cells beside it. They're nicely ordered. These have much larger nuclei. See that wrapping around? That's quite a squamous feature, almost purling. And then these very variable but extremely hyperchromatic nuclei. Cytoplasm is fairly dense with a well-defined cell border, just like we saw in cervix, and central nuclei there. And so this is a nice squamous cell carcinoma that's a bit less orangiophilic. So you can see how intimately mixed up the bronchial cells are here with some malignant SCC cells that have a very high NC ratio. Just in summary, benign mimics of SCC in respiratory specimens, things you need to look out for. One is squamous metaplasia, very typical morphology similar to the cervix, so cells that have a higher NC but should have no nuclear abnormality. Veggie cells, as I mentioned early on, the benign one can sometimes look a bit like keratinizing SCC cells. And that reactive atypia that you see A typical example of that is with Aspergillus, and I showed you an example of that as well. Definitely need to look for nuclear chromatin and atypia in those cases.